You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 32.
A podcast uncovering identity, color, and love, where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T-Bias.
What does toxic positivity really mean? When I first came across this word, I believe it was on social media. I saw it in a meme or something, and I didn't know what it was. And so I ended up looking it up on the internet and read a few articles about the meaning and the advice on how to handle it. And what I realized is it's a newer word. However, what's actually happening is that it's a familiar pattern that's already existed. And we sometimes create words to be catchy and to have information come across in an easier way. But sometimes we latch on to newer words and then we don't really know what it means. And then sometimes when we don't know what it is, then we kind of have a harder time understanding it and then figuring out ourselves how to handle it. So I've got my own breakdown of what toxic positivity is, and I think that you'll be able to see familiar patterns in new words when you kind of get at the essence of the word. And from this breakdown, I think you'll find that you'll actually gain positivity in a more organic way, in a healthy way, rather than in a toxic way. After reading a bunch of articles on toxic positivity, I realized that all it was the fact that positive emotions are the acceptable emotions. And you can more easily see this, I think, in Western culture, particularly in the United States of America, is that staying optimistic, being positive are valued. However, the essence of toxic positivity as clumping emotions into a bucket of good emotions or bad emotions is not solely a Western culture thing. It exists in other cultures. And in my culture, in the Indian culture, and in my family, I know that some emotions are not to be expressed. In fact, expressing emotions in general is not a valued thing, and expressing too much happiness is not necessarily valued in my family. So when you look at toxic positivity and you get to the heart of it, it really is about the acceptability of all emotions. And each country, each culture will have come with a certain script as to which emotions are acceptable and which emotions are not acceptable, or which emotions are acceptable to express and talk about. And no matter what you have learned about emotions, in order to effectively handle anything like toxic positivity, it's to actually understand your own acceptability of all emotions. And really, here, acceptability means how comfortable are you with the whole range of human emotions? Are you comfortable with the ones that you think are really negative? If you think about, well, what is one of the most negative emotions to experience, like hate or self-pity or shame, how comfortable are you with those? And usually when we're not comfortable on one side of the spectrum with really negative emotions, we're usually not comfortable with positive emotions, feeling joy, feeling contentment. We tend to actually probably feel uncomfortable with those emotions as well. And this is true on the flip side as well. So when somebody says to you, and you express an emotion, and somebody says to you, stay optimistic, or they change the subject, or they dismiss it, it's a reflection of their own uncomfortability with emotions. And so the way to actually increase your own positivity is to actually increase your acceptability of all emotions. And that means going against the grain, going against what you've learned from your family, from society, from your culture about emotions. So one way to approach increasing your acceptability of emotions is to actually think of your emotional experience in 2 layers. The first layer is actually going to be the base layer. So something happens, and an example is, I'll use an example. I failed at a 30-day goal. I made it 28 days of no chocolate. I was trying to cut out chocolate for 30 days, and I made it to only 28 days. And so the first emotion for me that came up was disappointment. Although I wasn't really aware that it was disappointment, but the actual base layer that happened for me, I'm imagining, was a bit of disappointment, probably a bit of shame. But the layer that I did notice was the layer of judging myself for feeling bad about it. And so then kind of this self-pity kind of kicked in as another layer of judging myself for feeling bad, for feeling shame, and realizing that, okay, it's not a big goal that I had. It was a goal, and there are other goals that I am achieving and things like that. And so I put this other layer of judgment and evaluation over the original layer, which was the original emotion that came up from failure. And actually, the layers can go on and on. So you can feel the base layer, the original emotion of something that has happened. So for me, it was the emotions that happened from feeling, that came from failing at something. And then there's the other layer where you judge that negative emotion. And then there could actually be another layer where you judge yourself for judging yourself, for judging that emotion. It could go on. And actually, for me, it ended up turning into a bigger deal because I ended up feeling self-pity, and I couldn't really get out of that cycle because I had built up so many layers on top of that original emotion. And in the middle of it, I managed to catch myself. It takes a lot of practice. And I said, okay, I'm going to let myself feel it. I'm going to let myself feel self-pity. I'm going to feel bad for myself. I'm going to feel the shame, the disappointment, all of it, all of those layers of emotions. And when I tried to catch myself from just feeling bad about feeling bad, I noticed I actually felt better. And that's where increasing your positivity actually comes from. It's reducing the number of layers you put on top of that original experience that you've had, that original emotional experience. And what I was doing was I was actually compounding that effect. I was making the disappointment and the shame 10 times worse with adding more layers on top of it. And so a lot of times I think we have a hard time catching ourselves at that base layer and allowing for that negative emotion because we have been taught by society that certain emotions are acceptable and certain emotions are not acceptable. Is that maybe we can catch ourselves in that second layer or that third layer where we're judging the emotion and judging ourselves for feeling something. Or it could even be that somebody else is judging us, but we're taking on that judgment as well, and then catching that judgment and allowing for all of it to be there. And what I found is when I can catch myself, even if it's gone past the original layer into the second or third layer, but when I can catch myself in one of these layers and know that the idea is, okay, I've put on the layers on top of the original layer, and now I just need to accept all of it. It's already happened. You've already had the emotional experience of feeling the negativity, the negative emotion, is to actually accept all of it. So to accept all of those layers, and that'll actually help you feel better, and it'll actually reduce the compound effect of it. And it'll actually help you get out of that negative spin, because that's where I think the negative spin comes from. It's those layers. And if you can catch yourself in one of those layers, you can actually reduce that spin, that cycle that you can get into, and kind of stop it before it goes on further and further. So I'm going to wrap it up here with a catchphrase that I saw on social media, a meme I saw, and it kind of wraps up really well the concept of accepting all your emotions. It's, don't be upset about being upset. And I'll check back with you next week.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.